Three. All right, then we're here with TeaTime with TeaTime. I'm TeaTime, and I'm bringing you TeaTime with none other than Hazed, a man whose only claim to fame was once upon a time to be one of the players who I powered through against, who eventually ended up becoming a member of the only two North American rosters who got a legend spot at a major using only NA players. Hazed, how are you?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well as well. Well, Hazed, you hit on something before we started the interview itself. You're a player who is currently not underneath any contract, so you can basically talk about anyone you want. You can talk about anything you want, as long as you're not really burning any bridges. So let's start things off a little bit slowly with your own career. You started off in about 2014 to the better half of 2016. You've played across 4 different organizations, maybe even 5. I wasn't really able to find out about your stint at Denial. Netcode Guides, Mousepaz, CLG, and obviously you started off with a stack of friends. Somehow you've had almost the same core 5 players. How did you guys even come across each other?
I came across the Mousepass core, which was at the time Lil Man, Finesse, Cutler, a guy named Robot 20, and I can't remember the last one for some reason, but they were a main team in ESEA back in 2010, I think it was, maybe 2009. And I met them like right before they made playoffs that season. They ended up winning main that season, going straight to invite. And I'd met them right before playoffs. A good friend of mine introduced me to him, and we started pugging and scrimming together with a bunch of the guys. And then over time, we just kept going like into their mumble like every day, just hanging out. And then, it's kind of friendships just grew over years. So I knew them for about 4 to 5 years before I played with them on a team. I'd been working a full-time job, and then CSGO came out, and I didn't play it for the first year because I'm a 1.6 loyalist, so I like trashing the game, and so I didn't play, and they invited me in, and I started scrimming with them after about a year of not playing the game. I came back and I was like, hey, I just kind of want to play and have fun. So I started throwing 10 mans. I was always the guy in 1.6 that hosted the 10 mans for the Mumble. There's about 30 of us that went to the Mumble every day. And yeah, I just came back, started throwing 10 mans. I got really good really fast. Specifically, me and Elige used to play DMs like 4 to 5 hours a day. We would just DM nonstop, and then we'd scrim or like play a 10-man. So I leveled up my game really quick, and then I was going to make a team actually with Mozbek, and I had never played a league in CS:GO before this.
Oh.
So they invited me to play on an invite roster with it was Mozbek, Slip, Frost, and TCK, I believe it was. And the first day I scrimmed with them, we played against Mousepads, and I played really well against them. And mid scrim, I remember Lucky and Finesse both messaged me and said, "Why don't you just play with us?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, I'd much rather play with y'all. They're my friends." And then that was it. And I was on Mousepads and never looked back.
Okay, so you've known FNS for how many years now?
Shoot. I think I've known FNS since 2010, so it's been about 7 years, maybe 2009. I don't remember exactly when I met them, but it was around then.
All right, that's actually perfect because we've got a couple of FNS questions later on. But for now, you did end up with about the core 5 players of yourself, Cutler, Tarek, JDM, and FNS, which was obviously the lost roster that ended up becoming the CLG roster eventually. So very consistently, we saw you guys have the same 5 people for many, many years. I mean, like I said, from the beginning of 2014 towards the better half of 2016. How does a North American team stick together with such tenacity, especially in a region where it's basically famous that, all right, someone's going to get poached, someone's going to get picked up, and 5 players just don't stick together. You see roster changes day to day, essentially.
Yeah, that was just because we were such close friends. JDM was kind of like the odd man out in that sense. We had tried him out the same time that I tried out. So he was new to the whole Mumble, and to be honest, he never really hung around the Mumble. He had his own Mumble that he hung out in. So it was almost, in some senses, strictly business before we moved into the gaming house together. So us 4 were always going to stick together. We knew that. We prided ourselves on not only just being friends, but being like willing to work through problems. We didn't believe in replacing players as a solution, unless there was like a very stark contrast in personalities that couldn't be worked through. We figured if we played hard, we worked hard, we could always level our game up. And that's what we tried to do. And then JDM, once we moved into the house, he became one of the boys, you know. So it was a very tight knit group of players. Even PTR before JDM. The only reason he was ever, you know, left slash removed that whole debacle was it was a personality clash. And that was the only thing that was really telling us to ever change rosters.
Okay, no, so actually, I wanted to touch on something you mentioned right now as well. So you talked about leveling up across the years, and that is definitely something you did. I mean, you guys went from being, quite frankly, a bit of a joke team in netcode guides, where, all right, fine, you were able to take games up against some invite players or some main teams, obviously, but when it came to the top level teams, you never were properly in competition of taking titles, for instance. So how do you think teams of today can actually learn for that? Do you think that there is still virtue of sticking together as 4 or 5 people for so long, or was yours just a very special case because of, you know, the power of friendship, essentially?
I don't think it's a special case. I think it can definitely happen, maybe not as often as maybe I will lead it on to believe, but it's definitely possible to do. I think what made us, uh, well, I'm not gonna say what made us. I think what you should do is if you're going to stick together, and all 5 players have to be skilled, or at least 4 of them have to be very skilled, and they have to have good work ethics. And early on, we had an amazing work ethic. It also depends on how you practice. You can't just go into scrims and just scrim. Like you have to have a plan going into it. You have to really like dry run strategies, study from time to time, bring, you know, you got to innovate. Those are all really important things. And we had a lot of motivation early on because we did have something to prove. And if they don't have that motivation, that drive to succeed and prove yourself, then your team won't succeed. All 5 players have to be on that same level. And for us, they were. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I think there are teams out there that could do it. I think a good example of a team recently in NA who has kind of risen through the ranks is Rise Nation.
Of course,
I
pun
think
intended.
they have the skill, but they they went from basically being a team that was a joke to being a team that can actually take BO3 series off of, you know, some top NA teams.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, so as I mentioned, you've played with a lot of organizations. I mean, netcode guides, denial at some point, and, you know, obviously eventually CLG. How did it feel like going from these random sort of comparatively no-name organizations to a huge one like CLG, whose name is basically synonymous with esports? You know, they've got a massive League of Legends lineup, and they've always been a brand that's been around for a very long time. How did it affect your responsibilities, your living conditions, all of those things as a player?
It changed quite a bit. I will say that initially when we joined, we thought that we were gonna have like this crazy following because of it, and that's not actually what happened
Like the
because
Optic effect?
yeah, it wasn't like the Optic effect, unfortunately, because their player base was so deeply rooted in MOBAs that it didn't really transfer over that well to us. We definitely got fans from it, but it wasn't anything like the Optic effect because FPS to FPS, a lot of those fans are going to enjoy the game, whereas MOBA to FPS, not as many are going to enjoy it.
Of course.
Um, so in that respect, it wasn't a huge transition, but I think monetarily it was because like myself and Cutler had both quit our full-time jobs. Um, I'd quit mine 6 months in advance, whereas Cutler I think quit his only a few months in advance. Um, and we were able to live full time on it now. So instead of taking up 8 hours of my day doing a full-time job, I could literally just wake up and then game like an extra 4 hours if I wanted to. So we were playing considerably more CS. We were getting better faster. So in that respect, it was very good. And then also a lifestyle change going. You know, we all had to move. It wasn't something that we had to do initially, but it was kind of one of those things where CLG was like they worded it in a way it was like it's not mandatory, but it is. Like it. Once we moved there, we realized it was kind of mandatory. There was no getting back. So that was a huge lifestyle change for us. And you know, being in Mousespaz or Netcode Guides or anything like, specifically Netcode Guides, you had sponsor demands, but it wasn't anything like like it is in CLG, and it being in a bigger org where it's like, so maybe you got to do a photo shoot, or do like a commercial, or, you're constantly having to, like, on stream, if someone is watching your stream, is like, hey, what headset do you recommend? You got to recommend your sponsor's headset even if you don't like it. And that's kind of like in my opinion, a
So
shitty
hard.
thing to do. Like, I hate it. But it's one of those things you got to do.
Absolutely. So, on the note of content and having to create content, one of the big reasons why League of Legends teams have team houses is because they like to be able to build a consistent storyline, and they like to be able to build like a sort of mystique and environment around their own team to be able to connect with fans better, and as you said, gain more fans. Did you ever feel that that was being done for you guys, or comparatively were you slightly neglected in the sense of development as a brand of Counter-Strike?
We were absolutely neglected. You can ask any one of my teammates. Specifically in the first, I would say, 6 months we were there. Um, we, what ended up happening is we moved out to the house. We were in our own room, and League of Legends. We were all in one giant house. League of Legends and us were in the same house, and we were kind of tucked away in a corner, and no one really ever came and talked to us. No one really, I mean, other than the players, like, there was never really any staff that came in and, like, wanted to do any content. The only time we ever did content was to do like a vlog, and I think I did one like right when I moved in, and I don't remember doing one again for a long time. But they never really wanted to do anything with us. And that's not, I don't want to fully blame CLG for that, simply because they were very understaffed at the time. They had one guy basically doing everything in the org, which was Matcom. And that's definitely not easy for them to do. And they knew that their main source of income, and specifically towards their fans, was from the MOBA, League of Legends. So we knew that we didn't know going into it was going to be this way, but we realized it pretty quick. We're like, okay, so we're kind of like, we're low on the totem pole here.
Black sheep of the family.
Yeah, so we need to, like, just focus on ourselves, let them do whatever the hell they want. We focus on ourselves, and let's just try to be the best team we can, and that's what we did.
So you guys were essentially the middle child no one likes to talk about in the family.
Yeah, unfortunately. But I mean, it got better. It got better. They, in 2016, they started hiring a lot of staff, and there still wasn't that much content that came our way. They still focused on League of Legends for sure. I would say there's probably 3 times more content for League of Legends there was for the CSGO team, but they at least did some content for us.
So we'll get back to the point of the organization in a couple of seconds. But first, people right now may not realize, and they may think that Tarek and JDM are these two godly North American players and prospects. Tarek, who's now newly gone into in-game leading as well, and JDM, who's always been one of the only oppers who could really, go head to head with Skadoodle, even back in his prime. So you've been there since they were nothing, and they have risen to fame since then. And I want to talk a bit about Tarek, where, obviously back in the day, there were, lots of ridiculous memes around him about, the entire, we're not going to mention it, but the brain thing. But that, and then now, now you see him developing into a player who's comfortably opting to in-game lead inside Cloud9 as what is the best team in the region other than SK. So how did that development go? Did you see that coming through in CLG? Because FNS was always there. Or did you see that being, shining when he was forced to play without a proper leader in those few months where you were coaching the Optic lineup?
Yeah, so in CLG, he definitely never showed signs of wanting to do that. That was something he stayed away from. Mainly, I don't know if it was ever there in the back of his mind, but he never made it known to us. Simply because we had 3 people who were very vocal. Finesse was always our main caller, as you mentioned. Cutler was kind of our secondary caller if we wanted him to be. And I would sometimes chime in as well. So we had 3 guys who were very vocal about strategy in the game. So Tarek was never really needed to do that. As far as when he started in-game leading for Optic, I think that was just down to necessity. At the PGL Major, when I was in-game leading for Optic, I did not do a good job. If anyone watches, I didn't call very well. I'm okay with admitting that. That's fine. And he kind of, after the PGL Major, we were all sitting there in like a group, and we had one more tournament left because it was a 3 tournament run. It was a month trip in Europe. We went to ECS London, bombed out there. Then we went to the PGO minor or major qualifier, bombed out there,
You
and
also
then
went
we
to
were going
Cologne.
to yeah, and then we were going to Cologne. So this was right after the PGL and in between that and Cologne. So we
Okay.
were sitting there talking, and he said, "Hey, I want to try in-game leading because it's not working right now." And I said, "That's fine. I understand. Like, give it a go." Because I realized I was not a permanent part of that team, and I probably was never going to be. So if he wanted to try this to see if it could work in the long run, I was totally on board with it. So that's what we ended up doing. He went to try an in-game lead, and it ended up working out like really well. He calls very off the cuff, very aggressive. In intuition is a lot of his calling. He's not really gonna sit back and do a lot of defaults and try and read the enemy from there and call and execute. He's more like, I think there's a hole here. Let's try and just
Bug
abuse
it.
it. And yeah, that's what ended up happening, and it worked really well for us.
And it obviously even transitioned pretty effectively over into Cloud9 as we're seeing these days. So, you know, you talked about a lot about how you guys were really good friends and you thought that, you shouldn't be trying to change things with rosters and you should try and develop as a team. So, regardless of that, to a lot of people, it seemed like a no-brainer that Cutler and, with all due respect, at some points in your slumps, potentially you should be cut from CLG to invest in, better players. And there were rumors about Xantares and at one point Michael Ellie who came into the conversation and, a lot of great players to potentially come into play for CLG. Why did this never materialize? Were they just rumors or was there actually some substance to those, especially the Xantares one?
The Xantares one was just a rumor. I can confirm that Tarek did talk to him, and we all agreed we wanted Xantares. We wanted him. We didn't care who got replaced if that needed to happen. We wanted Xantares though, and it wasn't like CLG's fault. It was mainly Xantares' loyalty to his team, and he said, I want to stick with these guys. I think we can be good. It was similar to like what we were doing with CLG. We were very loyal to our team, so um, that's why that never happened. There were a lot of names that went through. You mentioned Michael Ele. That was absolutely going to happen.
Really?
Um, Yes, that was going to happen. It was stopped by a few players on the team. Actually, it was a players who stopped it from happening. It was PETA trying to bring him in. The org agreed. As far as I know, I've never talked to the org about it, but some players on the team, I won't mention who it was,
Fair enough.
uh, disagreed with picking him up. Which I mean, I understand. They gave solid reasons. I get it. Freakazoid was also a name that around the same time after the Michael Ealy. There were some players as well who stopped that. Um, and then even before that, there was in 2015, right after we moved. Was it right after? It was late 2015. Might have been right after we moved to the house. I don't remember exactly. We had an opportunity. I've talked about this on stream. We've had an opportunity to pick up Hiko and Skadoodle as a package. This was this is right after Peter, because we wanted to get Skadoodle,
Okay.
and so we let Peter go, and we wanted Skadoodle. We were trying really hard to get Skadoodle, and they were kind of like a package deal at the time. And so I offered to sit. I said, "Hey, I'll be a six man or maybe even become coach. We need these two because if we get these two, we can be the best team in North America. And it's not even going to be close." And uh, CLG ended up stopping that from happening. It was a monetary thing, as far as I know, and yeah, a lot. I'd say a majority of roster moves that we wanted couldn't happen because of money.
Okay.
I'd say at least 80% were because of money. There were times where players just didn't agree with the choice, and we said, hey, maybe this isn't the right choice for us. Maybe we should wait. But a lot of times it was money.
All right. So, that's it's great that you let me segue into this, but in the beyond the numbers 12 that was recently released, where they did go over some of the statements given by Ryu and FNS about the entire ordeal, and there's generally about the statement in particular given by I'm a Pet about the ordeal, where he said that CLG never wanted to invest into the Counter-Strike team in order to be able to bring in proper actual talent instead of developing talent, which is basically like saying we don't want to pay money. So this is something that was mentioned in particular, that CLG as an organization doesn't love Counter-Strike. They were basically only in there for the sake of saying, oh, we have a portfolio with Counter-Strike as well. The only way that they were able to keep Tarek and JDM on board was with 2-year contracts, which had absurd buyouts. I think at one point it was said that Cloud9 wanted to buy out Tarek in, the latter half of 2016, and they weren't able to do so. So there was something that Thorin said, and I can quote this, that really stuck with me, that at the end of the day, you could make a better team out of the people they wouldn't accept rather than those that they have in their team. Could you comment on that?
I think you might be pushing it
Good old
a
Thorin.
little bit. Yeah, Thor. I think he's just trying to rile people up. He's never thought highly of some of us on CLG, which was fine. At the end of the day, it was just an opinion of his, and that's all it is. As far as how skilled some of the players we could have gotten, he's not wrong. Like some in some senses, that some of those guys we could have got were insane. I mean, I've already mentioned Hiko in 2015. He was considered one of the top NA players at the time.
Absolutely.
Skadoodle was easily the best hopper and during that time. We in 2016 we tried to get Breeze. That was stopped by as far as I know, stopped by the org. I actually don't know.
Didn't that end up happening in a few months anyway?
No, he never went to CLG.
Okay.
It was a very the whole situation was strange. I got a text. I won't say from who, but it was, hey, oh, how can I word this? Not throwing someone under the bus. I don't think I can actually. Well, okay, so I'll just leave it at.
It was a weird situation.
It was a weird situation. We had an opportunity to have Breeze. The roster would have been Breeze, Ethan, myself, Cutler, and Kusta. So that roster, in my opinion, would have been quite good. We'd have had two emerging stars in Ethan and Breeze. We would have had Kusta, who was trying to recover from his days at Liquid. So we could have had a very good roster, regardless of how bad Thorin thinks me and Cutler were during our time in CLG. I think we were good players, maybe not all the time, but at least at some points we were very good.
Sorry, just a second. Yeah, my bad. So this was also another thing that was discussed, that CLG said that they tried to build the CLG environment. They tried to bring in sports psychologists, coaches, and build this entire CLG structure instead of actually buying top talent. So they would invest a little bit of money into extra staff and things like the esports director, and invest a little bit of extra money there instead of actually being willing to dish out the money. Is that true, that they as an organization we're always saying that we should be able to find success on the basis of emerging talents rather than on the basis of actually buying new ones? And was that more of a philosophy thing, or was that more of them trying to say, what, we're going to save money and pretend that it's something more of this philosophy thing?
It's hard to say. I want to think it was a philosophy thing, but it might have just been a money thing. I don't actually know what their true motives were. If you look at the history of the League of Legends team, you would think it is kind of a philosophy thing. They had plenty of opportunities, at least from a fan perspective, to pick up a lot of players that were very well known within the scene, but they chose to kind of go with more unknown talent at times and kind of cultivate that talent. So it might be a philosophy thing, it might be money, it might be both. I'm not really sure. But it is a fact for the CSGO team that they were way more interested in not spending money. They did not take any action to make us the #1 team. We had to take all the action ourselves. And it caused us to butt heads a lot against the org.
Well, so at the same time, I want to compare it a little bit to other organizations, and a part of what I am going to go off of isn't based off of Counter-Strike, because I only know in depth of the Cloud9 League of Legends organization from a couple of interviews, and a little bit about Optic and Hex's reputation. And obviously, because you were a part of Optic, so you should be able to answer this pretty easily. So in CLG, FNS in his recent Peakers Advantage mentioned about how he butt heads with the esports director and about how his word wasn't really taken under consideration as much, even though when you look over towards his tenure in the organization, skipping the year that he was at TSM, he had been there for a year and a half. So, technically you'd think that this is a player who would be getting a significant amount of respect. He's gotten quite a bit done with players who, are somewhat suboptimal when you yourself say that, you had better options available that they didn't want to invest in. So, despite that, it seemed like they were going slightly against him and siding more with Ryo's side of things. Obviously, there's a lot of different things that you have to keep in mind, but if you compare this towards something like Cloud9, where, there's so many stories about Jack personally going towards players, owners personally going towards players and, talking to them, being able to sort things out, being practically a father figure to them. And if you compare that towards what FNS and what a few other stories have come out about CLG, is where, they seem very disconnected and somewhat uninterested, even personally within your CS team.
Yeah, a little bit. There were times where they did come over and talk to us. It was rare, but it did happen. And I think a lot of times that they did come over to talk to us is mainly to scold us for something. They very, very rarely wanted to connect with us. They were very hard to talk to. I tend to be very good personally at talking with really anyone. So it didn't really affect me that much. I treated them all like friends, so we got along pretty well. Um, what was strange about CLG was they have this notion of like family, like everything's a family. We're all just, we're so close, and it was kind of after a while we kind of realized like I don't think that's actually what's going on here. Like, I don't think we're actually friends. It's kind of like this persona that they're telling the community, but that's not exactly how it is in the organization, unfortunately. It is a business, and you're treated like an employee. You're not actually treated like family. So, um, Finesse, whatever happened over there after my time at CLG, I'm not sure. I didn't talk to him about it, but I can see how maybe there were some problems connecting with the owners, because I had seen it myself personally, and even during the departure of JDM and Tarek, Tarek was a lot more smooth than JDM, but during the departure of JDM, I thought there might be some fistfights going down or something. It was intense. There was
That bad.
The communication was very bad
Okay.
between the owners and the players for sure.
So if you compare it to, say, Optic, where, the reputation of Hex is he's one of the nicest owners, he's one of the owners who cares the most about his players. He talked a lot about even potentially letting Mixwell go back to Europe if he wanted to leave before the entire Freiburg situation happened. How did it feel going from CLG, who for 2 years is kind of like the abusive family, and going into essentially, I don't know, child protection services in Optic?
I might be pushing it a little bit. I don't think they were child abusers, but
I mean, you're not really a
Optic.
child.
Yeah, I didn't really. It's funny. I was in Optic for 3 months, and I don't remember ever talking to Hex once. No,
Okay.
no, and when I really think about it, I don't think I ever. I was always talking to Ryan or Optic J. I don't know what he goes by. I called him Ryan. He's the guy I talk to all the time, and he was like just the nicest, down to earth, cool person. I've met in management. I've been in a lot of teams, obviously.
Of
So I
course.
don't know that many, uh, higher ups in these other organizations, but I mean, within Optic, this guy was amazing. I love talking to him, and we talked all the time about, you know, future of esports, future of the team, like what can we fix? What do we need to do to make the team better? And it was just a lot of it. I feel like when I was on CLG, a lot of that stuff was kind of just like it was fluff. We talked about it, and they made us feel hopeful, and then nothing ever happened. Whereas in Optic, it maybe I wasn't there long enough, so I don't really know how it was because I was only there 3 months, but it felt like they were willing to get shit done, which was really nice. So I felt like Optic took care of their players big time. No, yeah, they were very vocal about and pushing us big time towards doing content. That Optic brand is all about YouTube content, everyone knows it. And they were very, vocal about, hey, if y'all push this content, we can push your content on like our main page, our Twitter, etc. And like it'll help your brand grow big time. You should really invest into your brand. That's something CLG told us a lot too, to be fair. They were very big on us branding. Um, but on Optic, it felt like
A way of
it was
life.
more beneficial. It was a way of life, but it was definitely more beneficial. It felt like they were helping us, whereas CLG, it felt like we were helping them. It was kind of too. It felt different on Optic, and I actually worked together with Ryan to come up with like ideas and stuff like that to do content for the team, and that wasn't going to interfere with practice and whatnot for these guys. So they were. I think the guys were very comfortable in Optic. I think they got too comfortable in Optic. I think Optic was so good for them, they got too comfortable, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. I think it might have changed nowadays since I'm a Pet became the coach and they have investors and whatnot. So I think there's more um, strict guidelines placed
Okay.
upon the team. Whereas before the investors and whatnot, it was very loose and very comfortable for players for sure.
All right, that's interesting. So let's take the conversation away from organization. I think we've hopped enough about that. So recently, in the past year or so, and also before, a lot of conversation has been struck up about coaching, and people are kind of torn about it. So many analysts, and in particular, Moses in the Peaker's Advantage podcast comes to mind, and a couple of players talk a lot about how a coach in Counter Strike doesn't really have the power so that they could do their job properly. So instead of being able to potentially bench someone, instead of being able to potentially penalize someone in any way, if they tell someone to do something and a player refuses, then the player will be given priority over the coach pretty much constantly. So, as someone who has been a coach, and I mean specifically in North America, because obviously Europe's entire ecosystem is different, as someone who's been a coach for a short amount of time, player, and at some points even an in-game leader, do you think that it's true that coaches need more power, and to what extent?
Absolutely. And I can even go back to Optic on this. When I was coaching Optic, uh, there were plenty of times where I would say that there was one week where we were scrimming 5 days a week, and during one week someone, not the same person, but someone was in the team late to practice 3 times in a week, uh, and like to me that's just wholeheartedly unacceptable. And the problem is I had no way of punishing them. And I had to go to Optic and be like, "Hey, we got to figure a way to punish them." And we couldn't really come up with anything concrete, mainly because what? I'm going to bench a player for being late maybe 3 times. I have to bench him, bring in a 6 man, so you just ruin the whole team dynamic. Um, so there's not really a lot. What do I dock pay? How do you like? How do you justify that? It's kind of it as soon as you do something like that, yeah, I
There's
mentioned
no
it to the
winning.
players. Yeah, I mentioned docking pay to the players for being late. I was like, hey, if you're late this many times, if it keeps happening, I'll have to dock your pay. Dude, the backlash on me was unbelievable. Like I was getting yelled at by the players. And I'm like, okay, so what do I do? Like I've lost the trust of my players. They don't trust me to show up on time, or I don't trust them to show up on time, but I can't punish them. I can't do anything to make them come on time. And now they don't even like me. So it's like how do you win? And that's I think the biggest problem in CS:GO as far as a coach is you can't get your players to do what you want them to do. There's no way to do it. And then even beyond that, as far as coaching in game, the rules for Valve are just fucked, man. You can't you can talk maybe 4 times in a match, maybe. Uh, you get the timeouts depending on the rule set. It depends on the rule set, obviously, but maybe 2 timeouts, and then uh, before first pistol and before second pistol. That's the only you get basically 2 minutes in the entire match to talk. So you feel useless a lot of the times. And I think they need to compromise with making
Free round.
every the dream hack rule that they did, where every freeze time you can talk. because I think that's absolutely fair. I think talking mid round is unfair. I don't think that should be allowed because coaches can see more than players.
Absolutely.
So I do think that's unfair, but freeze time should be totally like that should be coach time to be able to say, hey, this is the game plan, go with it. That way you can actually lead a team and coach.
I think it was actually mentioned by Moses in one of the podcasts, or it was at the Counterpoints, or maybe it was the same Peaker's Advantage, that this was actually something that was never really brought up to Valve. And when it was later on, they're like, you guys never suggested this, we would be okay with this. So I get what you're saying, and obviously that allows you a little bit more, breathing room as a coach. So let's move on to the current circumstances and the reason why I want to bring up the entire coaching thing. So we've seen circumstances surrounding Zeus, Stanislaw, Ryu, FNS, a lot of in-game leaders clashing with their coaches. And so if you look at both of these cases where, Zeus is a major winning coach, but at the same time, Stanislaw and Stewie are the only two North American IGLs who have gotten a first place finish at a 250k event in recent history. In the same way, FNS is sure he's a lot more accomplished than Ryu is. And, there's a lot of other considerations that have to be taken into the matter. But Ryu in particular has been a man who's come in simply because CLG needed someone and they thought that, this team isn't going anywhere essentially. So there's a reason for that. And if you look over towards it, where there's two instances where there's such huge clashes and you don't really know who's going to come out on top. You don't really know how that's going to happen. In these cases, obviously, the coaches ended up edging out for whatever reason, but it completely ruined the team dynamic. Do you think that coaches who are more tactical rather than motivational should just essentially have more power than the in-game leaders to be able to make sure that this doesn't happen? How do you think that mechanic should work traditionally in most teams? And does it vary on the basis of whether it's more of a team like CLG, which is, quite frankly, on a comparatively tier 2 level in the international scene, or whether it's a team like Liquid who are right on the cusp of breaking tier 1?
I think it depends on the rule set of coaching. I think what we just talked about with if you can talk in freeze time, I think the coaching or the coach should do a majority of the calling. He should be the guy leading. And if in that scenario you'd see, I think, Finesse as a coach rather than in playing in game. And like myself, I think a lot of in-game leaders would be doing that instead of being a coach or instead of being a player, they would be coaching. If the rule set stays the same as it is, the in-game leader should be leading, not the coach. The coach should be motivational. So I think you got to structure your team around the rule set right now. And I think I'm not sure what happened between Stanislaw and Zeus. I don't really talk to either of them that much, but in my mind, it should have worked because I feel like Zeus is a very motivational coach. That's kind of like his motif. He gets very active and loud, and he's hyping everyone up.
Like a Zonic
so I think he is. Yeah, he's very motivational, and I feel like Stanislaw is the exact opposite. He's super technical. He likes to think about what to do. He's not like getting all hyped and stuff. So I thought they were a perfect combination. So I don't know what happened there. Looking at CLG with Finesse and Ryu, though, I do feel like they're both very tactical type of players, or tactical minds rather. So I could see some clashing there because Ryu probably wants to in-game lead, even though the rule set he's playing under is not good for him to in-game lead, and he needs to be more motivational. And Finesse should be in-game leading, but every once in a while, Finesse has to, he's got to. I don't know if this happened, but he's got to drop the ego, and be like, if Ryu says something, he's got to listen because he is the coach. You're supposed to listen to your coach. Even if he's wrong, you got to listen to it and then visit it later and be like, hey, I think you were wrong. This is why. And then the two have to be able to communicate and without getting angry at each other. I think that's really important. It's a lot about maturity as well. I think, if both parties aren't very mature people, then they'll never be able to coexist in a team in any rule set. And I think because video games are what we're doing professionally, we tend to be younger a lot of times. Not me, but a lot of these guys tend to be younger. So if you get a really young in-game leader who's very cocky and doesn't know how to communicate well, he's probably gonna struggle with any coach you put him with.
I see. So, but within the hierarchy of authority, you do think that the coach should come out on top over the in-game leader? Not necessarily in calling, but in general, in the team.
In general, yes.
Okay, so that's basically what I was leading to. So, in a lot of sports, especially at the college level where there's younger players, there can be a better comparison drawn, as you said, with esports where there's a lot of young players. Coaches are considered to be like the cornerstone of a team where you will have coaches for a much longer time than you're generally going to have players. So, in my opinion, this is partially due to the volatile nature of sports lineups where players aren't necessarily going to be sticking around for more than 2 to 4 years, which may seem absurd to an esports person. 2 to 4 years is a lifetime. But you don't really need players who are going to be sticking around as much as you need a coach who can keep up the team environment, who can keep up the team morale mentality from generation to generation of players, essentially. And esports has even more volatile rosters in these sports, especially in North America. Wouldn't coaches that stick to teams in the manner who are given authority greater than any individual players, and they serve somewhat of a purpose? Like you see Zeus in Liquid, where all right, he's been there for God knows how long. You see Zonic and Astralis, who's the same with them. He's been sticking with the same core players for a very long time. Do you think that teams should potentially practically attach coaches to their brands moving forward as they develop further, or are there just not coaches who have the ability to do that outside of a set few people in the world?
That's I don't think I can actually answer that. I'm not really sure because it's hard to treat esports like a traditional sport.
Absolutely.
It's just so different that I don't know. I think coaching is so new right now, within specifically CSGO, that I can't say for certain if that's what you should do, is have like a coach attach it to the brand and then kind of, have a long career within a team, and they kind of develop a style, and what that style is for that team because it's been ingrained. He's created like a playbook. And I don't know if that's the way to go. I could see it working for sure. But right now I think I think it's too volatile right now. The scene hasn't been fleshed out, I think, in all of esports enough to have long-term job security. Unfortunately, it's just too volatile. I would probably consider coaching, and staying. If I was going to coach, I would not want to move organizations personally. I would hate that. Like I wouldn't want to be peacemaker where I'm going like org to org to org to org to org. I would want to stick to one and stay there for a long time, and be able and basically be invested into the organization. It's just right now the organization a lot of times isn't invested into you. So it's very scary to take a job like that because you don't know how long you're going to be there for. Um, I do think that it would be nice if you could have that kind of job security though, and like kind of build like a play style that you're known as a coach for bringing to a team, and you have your playbook, and I think that would be really cool. But I just don't think it's going to happen. Maybe, I don't know, for a few more years, I'd guess.
So do you think it's more because the scene is immature, or because the game and the competitive environment around the game itself, as in the gameplay itself, isn't really at the point where there's anyone who could serve that purpose at all?
Uh, I'm I think maybe the game, the way the meta shifts and whatnot, I think that might have something to do with it, but I couldn't tell you, to be honest. I don't know. I haven't really given it a lot of thought.
Okay, fair enough. So let's take the conversation back to in-game leaders, where something that you said really struck a good note with this one, which was that a lot of the times you think that FNS perhaps needed to let go of his ego when Ryu is saying something, and you said this without really having any context of what happened between the two of them, and just generally this was a statement out of the blue. So there's always been a lack of in-game leaders in. Wow, that was suddenly very bright. There's always been a lack of in-game leaders in North America. So because of this, a lot of in-game leaders are thrust into the conversation surrounding even top-tier teams that can compete internationally, like Liquid and Cloud9. So you obviously had Slemmy with his famous stint in Cloud9 and everything. Sometimes it feels like the in-game leaders in North America overestimate their own value in-game when you look at them on an international scale. And they overestimate their capabilities simply because of the very low supply. So sure, when you get someone like Stanislaw, who finally seems to be a great in-game leader in the terms of he won an event for a North American team that it didn't seem like it was going anywhere otherwise, And when you look at FNS, who's always been a bit of an MSL figure, I'd like to say, where he has been a person who's doing a lot more with being given a lot less in terms of the roster. So it seems like these are all players who have been hyped up so much and put on such a pedestal that they themselves develop an ego about their own skills as an in-game leader and as players that perhaps aren't entirely warranted when you look over towards, say, an in-game leader in Europe, where, all right, fine, you've got Snappy, for example, in Heroic, which is maybe a top 15 team right now, nothing compared towards what Liquid had, doesn't really have the talent pool to be able to deal with, to be able to play with, such as how Stanislaw had and Liquid. And you would still potentially say that, there can be an argument made that he would be a better in-game leader. So do you think that with even European tier 2 in-game leaders seemingly having better tactics, having less talent to work with, and sometimes finding a reasonable amount of success, is there an ego for the North American in-game leaders that is perhaps unwarranted?
I would say a little bit. And as you mentioned, it's I think a lot about supply and demand. There's really not very many out there. So they kind of know that they're super valuable because no one wants to in-game lead. And I think that actually happened because of the coaching change. I think it was, and it was at late 2015
Something
when
on those
coaches
lines when Navi fell
were
apart.
allowed to yeah, so a lot of teams had, dropped their in-game leader and put them in coaching roles because coaches could call. So I think a lot of that happened, and a lot of people were kind of like, "Well, shoot, I don't want to in-game lead because I won't be able to play anymore." So I think a lot of that happened within North America, where a lot of in-game leaders just kind of were like, "Well, we don't want to do this anymore. We want to actually play in a team. So like, why would I in-game lead?" So the supply went really like it plummeted. And so the ones who stuck to it, whenever they reversed that change to going back to, the current coaching rules, uh, it suddenly became they suddenly became very valuable as players. And I think maybe that inflated their ego a little bit, but I do think they are very valuable just because there's not many. So I do think some of that ego is warranted for sure. Simply because they stuck to the craft and kept doing it. Yeah, maybe they're not the most talented players in the world, but they know their role and they study within their role and they try and perfect it, which is I think very important,
It's a
especially
great
to
point.
me as a yeah, especially to me as a player. I respect people who stick to their role and they say, I'm going to be the best. Like at this specific role, I'm going to be the best. I also I like people who are willing to, swap roles for the sake of the team. But I have a lot of respect for people who really value their role and want to be the best at it and really study. So in-game leaders are the ones who do that the most. So yes, they do have an ego for sure. You have to have an ego to be an in-game leader, to be fair.
Of course. You
Because
can't be let down by
everyone
your players.
exactly. You want everyone to listen to you. Everyone needs to listen to you. So you have to call with confidence and kind of have that boisterous attitude about you. So I think it's good, but it does cause clashing with coaches, as we mentioned before.
Okay, fair enough. So that's actually a good note to move forward on. That you do mention that, okay, it's good. But now look over towards, say, Tarek and Stewie and, to some extent Nitro, who aren't traditional in-game leaders, and they found a lot of success with their lineups. Is this because, and obviously they had the option of going with, more traditional in-game leader. For example, Liquid had Stanislaw even in ESL1 New York, and, they did go with Slemmy over in the Cloud9 roster at some point, and I'm sure FNS could have maybe entered into the conversation, in being able to purchase him as well. But when they prioritize going with these players, obviously the Stanislaw situation is extenuating circumstances. But when they prioritize going with someone like Stewie or Tarek or Nitro in that case, does it say something that they think potentially these in-game leaders that I mentioned before, like FNS and Slemmy and maybe, someone like Daps, just aren't capable of leading them against the Europeans? Because obviously Liquid and Cloud9 aren't teams that are competing for regional superiority. They're competing to be within the top ranks in the entire world.
Oh, I think I don't think what they're scared of is the fact that they can't lead the team to success. I think what they're afraid of is their fragging power will hinder the team too much. They Cloud9 clearly values fragging power. That's why
Absolutely.
they've picked up star players and then just kind of everyone's flirted with in-game leading within the team. There was a time in C9 where like Jordan was in-game leading, Stu was in-game leading, Tim was Automatic rather was
Of
in-game leading.
course.
So they clearly are on the track to pick up the most talented players that they can and then make it work, which is fine. That can absolutely work. It's just you got someone on the team has to be comfortable with in-game leading at some point, and I think they got well, I wouldn't say they got lucky. They were smart in picking up Stewie. I mean, we tried to get Stewie too on CLG. We really wanted him. We didn't know he'd end up becoming an in-game leader and being that, pretty good at it. So I think they got a little lucky there. And then once they picked up Tarek because he started in-game leading for Optic, it was just kind of like that, I think kind of the pieces all fell together for that team, and that's very rarely going to happen. I think going with an in-game leader is the safe choice, which is what, Liquid has done with Stanislaw and now even Steel. But I heard Steel's not in-game leading, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. But
I think that might just have to do with the major coming around. We'll really properly see their roles after the major, I imagine.
Yeah.
So, as a player, as yourself, you have a lot of tenure and you've recently done some work as talent as well. How does it feel to be a player and constantly have analysts and people in desks? Like you said, Thorin has been a publicly criticizes you and Cutler, and a lot of other analysts do as well. So, how does it feel like them calling you out now for your decision making when you think about it now in hindsight, now that you have had that experience as an analyst who is going through the entire event, has to build a narrative, has to do all of these things? Were they more often right than wrong, and what are your thoughts on it now in hindsight?
In hindsight, I understand why they banter. I'll say that, because a lot of times you got to fill time. You gotta find new things to say, new things to talk about. You can't just always be, regurgitating the same crap every time. You've really got to like come up with new things to talk about every segment. So sometimes they're gonna banter about you. So I get it. As far as watching, the games as an analyst and trying to see what's going on, being a former player, it helps me big time because, they would criticize me and Cutler. They'd criticize everyone, on our team for something that we did that wasn't even specifically our fault. Sometimes, someone would make a comm on our team and we trust the comm, but it ends up being wrong and it makes us look really stupid. But we get blamed for it because they can't hear that comm. So, there's a lot of stuff that goes into the decisions we make in game that aren't known to the analysts. And so when I'm watching and I see someone do something really just strange, I'm like, okay, that made no sense. That looked like a really stupid play. I think to myself, okay, maybe he's dumb. It's possible. Maybe he's stupid and he didn't know what he was doing. Or maybe there was something happened, communication wise. Maybe a teammate said, hey, push this. And it made him look really stupid, but it wasn't actually his fault. He was just listening to his team. So I don't blame them completely for some of the banter they come up with, because like I said, they got to fill time. They got to talk about new things. But, sometimes in their analysis, they are just wrong. Mainly because they're blaming me for or not me, but just in general, they're blaming the players for something that wasn't really in their control.
Okay, fair enough. So if they were to come in as more of a coaching role, because I know, as I said before, all these analysts like Lurpis, even Thorin has mentioned this at some points, and Moses have received offers about coaching, which is something that they've stated so publicly. And do you think that as coaches, they would be able to fulfill the same role that you need to be able to do so, considering that they will have all the information required? And will they be able to do it as effectively as, say, someone like maybe someone at slightly higher caliber than Ryu, because he was like comparatively untested within that territory?
I think some of them could be coaches. I don't know if they'd be great coaches. I personally wouldn't want Thorin as a coach, and I don't mean that to be disrespectful to Thorin. I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Thorin, because I think Duncan is a super smart guy. Like I love his videos and I think he's very knowledgeable. But as a coach, strategically, I don't think he would be very good at actually coaching a team. I think Moses, we actually tried to get Moses on CLG in 2015. This is right when he was starting his kind of casting career, analyst career. So he turned us down because he saw that he could make us something really big. So we understood. So we did, we did try to get Moses. We thought he'd be pretty good. Lurpus, I haven't really had much interaction with him, so I don't know. But I'd say anyone who is an ex-pro, especially at a high level, like, maybe winning tournaments, could probably become a pretty good coach because they understand the motivations, the communication that's required, and strategically what needs to be done to win tournaments. So I think they are very valuable. Some of them, I wouldn't say all of them though, but could they be better than Ryu, or some of these untested coaches? Probably, yeah. They just have more tenure and experience than a lot of these guys.
Okay, fair enough. So, just like the last question before we move on to its end of the interview. So you're in Muffin Lightning right now, which is maybe it's just
No, I'm not.
like you're not.
Nope.
Liquipedia lied to me.
Yeah, I was. I left it. I was on the team, but I never really was on the team. If that
Okay,
kind of makes sense. I told them I wasn't going to practice or anything. I was just going to play matches, and they could replace me at any time. It wasn't going to bother me.
so you were like
And
Shroud.
yeah, yeah, sure, we could say that. But I'm not with them anymore. I mean, if I'm still on the team, I'm mainly roster riding. I'm not actually playing.
Okay, because the Liquipedia had something, and Decay's entire Discord was also telling me, oh, ask Hazed about his stint in Muffin Lightning. So that's even better then. What's the next step on the road for you? Where are you going right now? What do you want to do? Maybe some more desk work, maybe something like that, because you were welcomed on the desk over in the DreamHacks.
Yeah, so I get asked this every time I stream. So that's what I do full time now is I stream. Uh, but every time I'm streaming, I get that question like, "Hey, what are you doing next?" Like what's next for you? And it's the same answer every time. I've thought about it a lot, and it hasn't changed. I'm done. I think I'm done with the pro scene. I don't think I'm going to go back. There's a multitude of reasons for that. Um, but I think a lot of it has to do with I've kind of lost like the motivation to sit down and practice nonstop and not win tournaments. Unfortunately, it's just the truth. Like I haven't been the best player in the last, I'd say, year and a half. So I don't feel like I'm actually bringing a high level to a team. So I'd rather kind of stay away from it. And focus on streaming and doing stuff like that. As far as desk work, I'm okay with doing desk work. I would like to keep it to a minimum, maybe one a month if possible. But I want to do streaming. That's definitely what I want to do. I've been, I'd say streaming, I think every day about 7 hours for the last month. I'm really
That's impressive.
trying to, I'm really trying to make this work. I've wanted to stream since 2010, to be fair, when Own TV was out and or maybe it was 2011
Like
when it was Own
bloody
TV
North
and
American players.
it's the truth. It's what I saw when Own TV came out and Hotshot GG was streaming. I said, this right here is going to be the future. I need to do this, but I was in a small town. My family didn't have a lot of money, so I couldn't afford the internet to do it, unfortunately. So now that I have, money from professional gaming, and I saved really well, I can pursue streaming. So hopefully I can make it work. I did say I would go back to playing pro if there's one, it's never going to happen, but they would just someone would have to come out of nowhere and it'd have to be a top team and it'd have to offer me a lot of money. It's not going to happen, but that's the only way. I'll support esports for sure. I'll support North American players. If a team needs me to ring for a game or something, I will totally do that. I will help anyone that needs help, but I don't think I'm going to be in the pro scene ever again.
Okay, so because you mentioned streaming, so streaming generally does go side by side with content creation. Do you have any plans for any interesting content that you can come up with that you'd like to be that you'd like to promote essentially that people should look forward to it?
No, not particularly. I haven't really given it a lot of thought. Right now, I'm just focusing on just getting my stream going, getting enough subs to be able to support myself. And that's really it right now. I'm just streaming full time. People ask about YouTube all the time, but I'm like, I don't think I'm going to get into YouTube. I'm not really about the demonetization BS that's going around there. Maybe I will someday, but right now it's strictly I'm just streaming every night and that's it.
Okay, so just to casual fun life. I say casual. I mean, 7 hours of streaming sounds hellish, but casual fun life, I
Yeah,
suppose.
seven's my minimum. It's anywhere from 7 to 10.
I mean,
So
I cap out at 5, man. Anyway, so finally, before we finish things off, do you have any shout outs, call outs? I'd like some call outs, honestly. Those always make Reddit front page. Anything you'd like to say?
call outs. Who do you want me to call
I
out?
don't know. I mean, you say you're out of
This
the
is
contract, and every time something's coming up, I'm like, yes, Reddit front page, here I come. But no, and it's fine. I mean, you don't absolutely have to. Any shout
I'll
outs,
call out.
anything?
I'll call out my old Optic teammates actually for
Oh,
not showing up to not respecting me as a coach, showing up on time for practice. Pieces
oh,
of shit. Why can't I show up on time?
well, but
No,
you have a
I
hair.
love those guys. Love those guys.
Absolutely. So, where can people find you, Hazed?
You can find me on Twitter at HazedCS, and you can find my Twitch, which is what I do every single night. I'll probably be going live at about 2 hours from now, so 8 CST, Central Standard Time in the United States, at twitch.tv/hazed. Find me there.
All right, that's about it for the first episode of Tea Time with Tea Time. Thank you for being with us, Hazed. And
Thank you.
yeah.